Last month, a report landed on the desks of every major CEO in Detroit. It wasn't a forecast. It read more like a warning label. Some analysts are calling it a make or break moment. And for the first time in generations, the big three are staring at a threat they don't really know how to answer. That threat looks almost harmless on screen, a sub-$6,000 electric car in China. For the price of a used 2012 Corolla, people can now buy a brand new EV with an official rated range in roughly the 120 to 220 kilometer zone, depending on the version and battery size. On paper, that sounds like a typo. It isn't. And here's the part that has policymakers in Washington genuinely worried. It uses a modern battery pack that's been through extensive safety testing and uses chemistry marketed as far more stable and resistant to fire risk than older designs, even when things go wrong. While Western car makers rack up tens of billions of dollars in EV-related losses and write-downs, Chinese automakers quietly built something the American market assumed was impossible: an ultra-low-cost EV platform that's safer, simpler, and doesn't cost luxury car money to manufacture. It has a very boring name vertical integration. In 2026, it behaves less like a business buzzword and more like a weapon. So in this video, we're going to walk through what those internal reports are actually warning about, where the economics start to crack, and why the politics hasn't caught up yet. Because this isn't just a story about cars. It's a story about who gets to control the next energy system. When the Best and Pony first showed up on spec sheets and safety briefings, a lot of people in the West simply didn't believe the numbers. An electric vehicle cheaper than many smartphones, built on a heavily automated line, and sold in China for the equivalent of roughly $5,000 to $6,000 depending on trim, incentives, and local taxes. If you work in Detroit, that doesn't just look aggressive, it looks unreal. Its battery chemistry is a big part of the story. Instead of older nickel-rich cells, the Pony and small EVs like BYD's Seagull lean on lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, chemistries. These are widely seen as more stable and more resistant to thermal runaway than many nickel-rich packs. In many failure scenarios, these packs are engineered to contain problems and shut down affected cells rather than erupt into full-blown fires. But no battery is completely risk-free, and engineers will tell you that straight. Engineers in Detroit talk about this kind of no-drama battery as the holy grail. In parts of China, it's just the baseline expectation now. But chemistry is only the first layer. The real advantage is geography. Major components, from cathode materials to stamped body parts, are sourced from tightly clustered supplier parks wrapped around the factories, shaving logistics time and costs down to the bone. No long ocean shipping legs, fewer middlemen, no 10-week delays waiting for a part to clear a port. That's vertical integration in its modern form. Where Detroit has suppliers, China has ecosystems. Now, let's talk numbers and why the math is breaking Detroit. In the US, companies like Ford openly admit they've been losing tens of thousands of dollars on each EV they sell in some recent periods. Massive investments in new platforms, software, and factories haven't paid off yet, and the red ink shows up as multi-billion-dollar write-downs and strategy resets. If you're wondering how that's sustainable, it isn't, at least not for long. In China, tiny city EVs like the Pony can hit showrooms for around $5,000 to $6,000 in some trims. And many analysts argue that, thanks to scale and integration, manufacturers can still make money at those levels. The gap isn't just labor costs, it's how the factories themselves are built. These are smart plants, highly automated lines run by software, where design updates can be rolled out far faster than the months-long retooling cycles legacy plants are used to. Imagine if Apple made cars at Foxconn-like scale. That's the kind of production engine these companies are building. Meanwhile, many of Detroit's factories are simply old. Core assembly equipment can be more than a decade out of date, and production software is patched slowly, not streamed instantly. A shift change in an American plant can mean the line pauses. In a hyper-automated plant in Guangdong, the robots just keep moving. We've reached a point where the economics of affordable EVs barely make sense for American automakers. Selling one compact EV at a loss is manageable. Selling most of your entry-level lineup at a loss? That starts to look less like innovation and more like a slow-motion liquidation. While the big three pour billions into marketing high-margin trucks and SUVs, China's EV players are focused on something else entirely: distribution. They know they can't just flood the US market tomorrow, so they're quietly setting up shop in places like Mexico and Brazil, with knockdown kits and regional assembly that let them tap into trade deals and tariff structures more efficiently. In some regions, those cars can be finished locally, labeled as regional production, and moved around on more favorable trade terms. It's economic judo using the weight of existing trade systems against the countries that built them. So what does all this mean for Detroit? It means legacy automakers are facing their most serious structural crisis since the Great Depression. But this time, there may not be a bailout big enough to buy years of breathing room. Industry estimates suggest global automakers have racked up on the order of $50 billion in EV-related losses and write-downs in just the last few years, with Ford, GM, and others taking a big share as they reverse or delay EV plans. Their bet was that Americans would embrace premium EVs, especially expensive electric trucks and crossovers. While they were designing luxury, China was designing efficiency. At the low end, Chinese EVs can retail in the roughly $5,000 to $12,000 range for smaller city cars, often using simpler LFP packs and aggressively optimized designs. Many now ship with modern software features like advanced range prediction and app-based controls as standard, not as expensive add-ons. You can already buy these cars or very similar Chinese EVs online, or through dealers in a growing number of markets across Asia, parts of Africa, and Latin America. More plants are coming online in South America. Every order helps scale their supply chain and quietly erodes Detroit's claim to global leadership. The scary part isn't just price, it's speed. In 2023, China exported roughly 5 million vehicles, overtaking Japan as the world's largest car exporter. Some forecasts now suggest Chinese vehicle exports could push towards 7 million units a year by the middle of the 2020s if current growth rates hold. By contrast, US automakers have seen exports stagnate or slip in several segments, even as global demand shifts toward EVs. China now produces several times more EVs than the United States, depending on how you count plug-in hybrids and exports. Here's the brutal truth: if Chinese-linked supply lines were suddenly cut off tomorrow, most major EV programs in Detroit, Austin, and Fremont would face serious disruption in short order. Batteries, crucial minerals, magnets, inverters, and even some chips ultimately trace back through Chinese factories or Chinese-backed projects. For years, that dependence felt convenient. Now, it feels like a choke point. But this isn't just about factories, it's about ambition and culture. Walk through one of the so-called gigaplants near Shenzhen, and you see something Detroit hasn't attempted at scale in decades: a vertically stacked operation where battery, body, electronics, and software teams all share a single campus or even a single tower. An engineer can walk downstairs, test a new idea in the lab, and see it on a pilot line the same week. In Detroit, those teams are often in separate buildings, separate states, or even separate companies. Every division has its own calendar, its own sign-off process, its own risk aversion baked in. That's the culture gap: speed versus procedure. A former engineer could put it bluntly: we spend months validating a part that a Chinese competitor can redesign and retool in days. It isn't about incompetence. It's about systems that were optimized for compliance and stability, not for disruption. The US government knows there's a problem, but the response is slow and politically messy. Tariffs can raise prices on Chinese cars, but they can't erase the cost gap overnight. Incentives and laws like the Inflation Reduction Act are pumping money into domestic battery and EV plants. But many of those facilities won't be fully online until the late 2020s. By the time they are, The global low-cost EV segment may already be dominated by Chinese brands and platforms. For decades, America exported cars, culture, and confidence. Now, it's importing a big chunk of the technology that will run the vehicles of the future. Made in America still matters, but in the EV race, it risks sliding from default to niche. Financial markets have noticed. Investors are quietly rotating away from some legacy automakers and into the companies that control materials and battery tech. Lithium, nickel, phosphate, these are the new strategic resources. Chinese companies have taken major stakes in key lithium assets in places like Africa and dominate a huge share of the world's battery-grade refining capacity, including nickel processing tied to Indonesia's export policies. Detroit, meanwhile, is juggling labor disputes, pension obligations, and internal fights over who really owns the product roadmap. While they argue, the market keeps moving. Even Tesla, the supposed American disruptor, isn't immune. Elon Musk has said that the future of mass-market EVs depends on slashing battery costs. Tesla's long-teased cheaper model, often talked about as a roughly $25,000 car, has seen its timeline slip multiple times. That delay opened a door. Companies like BYD and others sprinted through it. They didn't necessarily invent a better car, they built a cheaper, denser supply chain. In a decade where most buyers care more about price and charging access than 0-60 times, that might matter more than raw performance stats. This is where the story stops sounding like business news and starts sounding like geopolitics. Whoever controls the EV supply chain effectively shapes the energy transition itself. Cars become the delivery system for software, for data, for standards, and ultimately for influence. Every connected EV reports back to its network. If those servers sit in Beijing instead of California or Michigan, what does that mean for national security, for data privacy, or even for how insurance companies price your risk? That's why Washington is worried not just about lost profits, but about lost autonomy. For the first time, American roads could be filled with machines that are technologically sovereign to another country. So what happens now? The big three really have two paths: nationalism or reinvention. They can push for more tariffs, export controls, and outright bans trying to build a moat around the home market. Or they can do the harder thing, burn their old playbook and rebuild for a world that rewards adaptability over tradition. Reinvention means retraining engineers, retooling factories, and rewriting software stacks from the ground up. It means accepting that the full-size pickup might not be the default family car forever, and that the future of daily driving might look smaller, smarter, and a lot more Chinese than Detroit ever expected. The irony is that Detroit started this game. A century ago, Henry Ford's River Rouge complex was the prototype for vertical integration. Raw materials in at one end, finished cars out the other. He understood the power of controlling every step. Today, that spirit of total control lives on, but largely on the other side of the Pacific. Where American factories once exported the idea of freedom on four wheels, Chinese factories are now exporting something else: inevitability. Every round of layoffs in Michigan can feel like it's mirrored by a swarm of new hires in Guangdong. Every pause in EV research here is matched by another patent filing there. And once the first truly mass market, $5,000 or $6,000 EV crosses into a Western dealership at scale, most consumers won't care who built it. They'll care that it works, that it's safe enough, and that it fits their budget. When that moment arrives, brand loyalty dies with pricing power. And Detroit's dominance, the story that helped define the 20th century, faces its hardest test yet. In 2026, Detroit's legacy isn't just under pressure, it's being out-evolved. You can't patriot your way out of physics, software, and economics. The big three once ruled because they controlled the assembly line. This decade will belong to whoever controls the battery supply chain, to whoever can turn an energy revolution into something average people can actually afford. So when that $5,000 or $6,000 EV finally rolls onto American soil in real volume, remember, this isn't just competition, it's a countdown.